Hello, everybody. My name is Fernando Alday. I'm the host of the Leaps of Insight podcast. This show is about the path for growth. It's for people who are looking for their true selves. We are here to support you and also to challenge you with new perspectives and new ways of being in the world. Enjoy. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Leaps of Insight podcast. Today we have Claire Goodrich with us. Hi, Claire.
Hello, how are you?
Really well, really well. I'm really excited for
Me
today.
too.
Claire, when I see your social media, I see that your bio says that you are dedicating your life to human flourishing or planetary flourishing. You have founded the Future of Flourishing, and you are a coach in human potential. So let's talk about all of these things. What is flourishing, and how does one devote their life to that?
Well, it's a super interesting question with many different answers, I think, according to who you're speaking to. So I can give you a sense of what it means to me and what it means to the people that I've been collaborating with and co-creating with for the last few years. But just to give some context to the broader topic, I mean, it's a word that's been used a lot, particularly, I guess, in positive psychology in the last couple of decades, and that's the work of the amazing Martin Seligman and Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And flourishing in that context refers to this state of optimal psychological well-being and this real sense of life satisfaction. And then you can look at it through like the lens of the humanistic psychologists, of whom I love. And they're talking around this idea of self-actualization and really fulfilling your own unique human potential in your lifetime. And that's the work, obviously, of Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers and his peers, and the wonderful Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman, who I work with today, is forging that work forward and making it relevant and meaningful in a 21st century context, 2023 context. And then I was thinking today about, there's just so many different lenses to look at this notion of flourishing. And then if you talk to the ecological psychologists, they talk about this broader perspective that extends beyond the individual to encompass the well-being of individuals in context of their ecological environment. So there's many, many different lenses and perspectives, and I think they're all very interesting and important. And what I love to do in the work that I do is absorb and understand as much as I can, and then sort of integrate or layer what makes sense to me. And me being a practitioner, not a scientist, so I love gleaning the knowledge and the creativity of the scientists, and then finding ways to apply it in practical everyday life. So where I've sort of landed, and you know this because we've done a bit of work together, um, but I feel what flourishing means to me and in the work that I do today in 2023, and I think this will evolve, but it's very much about having this capacity to master moments in real time in a way that allows you to deploy your truest self in a really adaptive manner, and in a way where you're being really true to your values and true to your purpose, but also really true to yourself as well as true to the whoever you're encountering or the environment that you're within. And then ultimately with that, being true to the planet writ large, this beautiful sacred place that we all call home. So it's this idea of, it's not really a destination, it's not even really a goal. It's like it's a moment to moment experience that I think is what's important, especially in this moment that we're living through right now with exponential change, and a lot going on, a lot of complexity to life as we see it. So to do that, to master those moments, I think is actually very difficult and requires initially a massive amount of radical self-awareness. And we know, that is step one, and it's also very, very uncomfortable. Once you've got this self-awareness, it's unless you sort of know what to do with it or even have a desire to do something with that self-awareness, it's a very uncomfortable space to be in. So then it's having this desire to spot areas of growth, and then the energy and support and the, again, desire just to actively do something about those areas of growth. So really, essentially, I think to get to that ability to master moments, you need a desire to grow. And that needs to be sort of a very holistic approach. So we're talking about mental, physical, social, emotional, financial fitness or well-being, I think is very much required. And then I don't think it stops there, because I think to really master moments, I have this belief that through lived experience that no one flourishes alone. So ultimately, human flourishing, I think, is intrinsically linked to community or societal flourishing, and then that's where and how we might find ourselves somewhere toward global flourishing. And I think that the reason why we don't flourish in isolation necessarily is because we are social creatures, and that's obvious, but we're social creatures with this drive to contribute, drive to find meaning, drive to actually innately do good. Um, so I think that's sort of where I'm doing the work right now with people around, in service to global flourishing, is around helping myself as a human. I don't, and helping myself do that, but then helping others to find ways to master those moments, so that over time those moments turn into, elongated moments that turn into months, years, lifetimes, where we're able to, you know, individually flourish, societally flourish, and then hopefully globally flourish. And there's lots of ways to getting there. I want to acknowledge the fact that you can't sort of force this on anyone. It's a choice to flourish, but I think there's many ways to create the building blocks or the conditions for humans to flourish, and that's where I get excited, and that's the work that I've been doing, and I guess that's how we met in the first place.
Yes, absolutely. I love it. I love this perspective. As you said, it's a multidimensional thing about life flourishing. It's not just a one solid uh, thing that is just one lens and one perspective, but it can be seen from many angles, and because it includes everybody. And what I was thinking is that you've talked about mastering the moment, and that self-awareness. From what you said, it seems like it's a very fundamental. What are the fundamental aspects or skills or ways of being that can cultivate the conditions for flourishing?
So I have, in the research that I've been doing, and then also in the pilots that I've run, and the so hundreds of people that I've sort of worked with to explore this, I've come across a few different building blocks. Or I don't think this journey to flourishing is linear either. I think it's very circular, and you can probably start anywhere on the spectrum of what I'm about to share with you. And also, you can progress and really, I guess, have a sense of growth. And then the reality of that is there's always a regression of some sort. So it's quite, and you have to be very aware of that. And even I was thinking today before this podcast, because this is my favorite topic, and I was quite excited to be able to talk to you about all of this. But I was thinking how interestingly, I just have so many examples of that progression and regression even in my life in the last few months. It actually kind of, I think the way we're living at the moment is, um, so much happens in a month. It feels like 5 years. So I want to make that very clear with what I'm about to share. But really, I mean, I do think it does probably always fundamentally start with a level of self awareness, and a desire to grow that self awareness, external and internal self awareness. And that's a tricky thing, because, I mean, initially it's quite invigorating and quite enlightening. But then the more knowledge you have about yourself, the more uncomfortable things become. And it can be quite difficult to sit with that level of self awareness without knowing what to do with it. So then the next stage is then really looking at things like your personal narrative, the stories you tell about yourself to yourself, and whether they're adaptive, whether they're conducive to growth, or whether they're perhaps maladaptive, meaning that they're holding you back in some way. And that's often rooted in experiences we've had when we're younger and in childhood. And then it's knowing what to do to kind of rewrite those stories and make them so that we find growth within them rather than any level of trauma. And there's a spectrum there that obviously can take a long time to kind of rewrite those stories, or it also can be quite simple. It's also looking in the shadow, so that's the work of the depth psychologists and Carl Jung in particular, and the archetypal psychology, and looking at what are we repressing in our life and why, and how can we bring light to it in a way that makes us more of an integrated human, a human that is happy with all their parts, or happy might be the wrong word, but accepting of all their parts. Um, and then I think, the really interesting work comes in looking at self-expression and creative self-expression. And, when you uncover what's in the shadow, you often uncover what you're repressing from a self-expression perspective or lens. So looking at how you could bring that to life, and what the world could benefit from through you shining light on those repressed parts of yourself. And then it kind of moves into my favorite topic of all time, the flow state, and looking at how you can experience flow or high flow lifestyle uh, in a way that's anchored to something meaningful. So not just for the sake of it, and no judgment here. Flow for the sake of flow is a wonderful thing and should be experienced, and there's really good reasons why. But also, if you can then harness it and anchor it toward your uh, purpose in life, or at least the things that are meaningful to you and your values, then it becomes a very powerful factor, I think, in well-being, and not well-being initially, and then moving into sort of peak or optimal performance. And then once you kind of get on that flow merry-go-round cycle, which is a wonderful place to be, it is really important to know how to regulate it. So too much flow without the right kind of protocols to recover and to harness it is the same as being addicted to a substance that's not good for you. So there's a lot of good science out there now that shows us how to move through that flow cycle with ease and with grace. And that's where it becomes a matter of habits and rituals and routines that you have to embed into your day and week and month and lifestyle to ensure that you can continue that flow over the long haul in a healthy way and a sustainable way that provides meaning and fulfillment to your life, because it's anchored to values and purpose and a future goal. And then I think really what that sort of leads to is contribution, like in service of what? Flow and flourishing and well-being in service of what? And that's very personal, and that could be as simple and important as how you show up for your partner or your friends or your family or your kids. And then it can transcend into whatever drives you. So some people are driven to have these massively transformative purposes, which I think is amazing, so that in service and contribution to something that may solve some sort of large global problem. I think right now, the as important, even if not more important, focus should be family life, community life, with a global perspective and a futures perspective, but really looking at how we can feed a lot of the knowledge to each other and to our children, so that those humans forging forward have regulated nervous systems and a knowledge of the knowledge, at least to uh, bring a lot of this into systems and institutions and everyday life in a way that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, wow, I love that framework, that the way all of these components dance with each other, and how it all builds towards what you said before, that it's a way of living, and it's a way to cultivate a better life, and also because it's very applicable. Those are very specific components, but they are very applicable to everybody's life, whether you whatever kind of lifestyle you have, or whether you are young or old, or whatever profession you have. And I would like to ask you about how you have experienced those, because you are the one who weaved them and put them together and made them work. And so if you can share with us a little bit about how they came into life, because that framework I think is a beautiful thing to have, um, all of them together, because a lot of people just focus on the one thing, just focus on flow, or just on self-awareness or creative self-expression. But the way, if looking at all of them in conjunction, it makes them much more powerful, much more delicious, I think.
I love that. I love that question too, because I haven't actually been asked it so specifically. And the way that came together, I mean, in addition to just general life experience and I guess things I was searching for as a human, experiencing this life, the way that I layered both the science and that sequence together was through having the amazing opportunity to work with two in particular of the great thinkers and artists and scientists out there. I think they're both artists and scientists, Stephen Kotler and Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman. So over the last 5 years, I've had the opportunity to work with each of them together within the same organization and then separately as well. So therefore had already had a desire, but then had the opportunity to take a deep dive into their work, not only through reading their books and through doing their programs, but then from working with them and looking at how to translate their work and their theories to the everyday person. And through that experience, that's where I saw, I guess, had the epiphany of sorts that a lot of this stuff needs to be layered together. So much of this development work or mental health work or personal development work, whatever terminology you want to use, it's done. Brilliant workers out there, brilliant researchers out there, but it's often delivered and trained in silos. And you can understand why. There's a commerciality to that. At the same time, I see humans going through these training programs with part of them growing and then other parts sort of lagging behind or not understanding how to catch up, or you've grown as a person fundamentally, therefore you don't relate as well to your partner anymore or your friends anymore, so therefore there's a gap there. So there's sort of it's a complex journey. And I think sort of having the cognitive neuroscience layered with the humanistic psychology, layered with the positive psychology, layered with the existential philosophy, and whatever else you're doing, depth psychology layered in there. It just that in itself, I think, provides a pretty amazing blueprint for human flourishing. It's made amazing leaps and bounds toward integrating all of those different theories. And I think that maybe I was also inspired by that approach to things. He was one of my first inspirations years back when I started going down these rabbit holes. But I think what is also lacking is how to then really translate it in everyday life. So whilst Ken Wilber's work is amazing, it's not going to be stuff that the everyday person or teacher or parent is going to pick up a book like that and go, oh, I know how to put this into practice. So I think it's a matter of taking a lot of this stuff, particularly the cognitive sciences, integrating, laying them together, figuring out how to translate them to humans in a meaningful way, and in a contextual way, and then making it accessible, not making it like a $5,000, $10,000 training course to do, but really fundamentally democratizing the science of human potential, the science of human flourishing. Um, that's what I saw. That's what I saw an opportunity for. So it's not an easy thing to do either. So, and this is why I've really chosen to collaborate, co-create, not only with the amazing peers I have and the amazing, my peers, and then the trailblazers leading the science, but then the people the coaches and the mentors and the facilitators and the educators, and then their clients, so that we can all figure out really, well, what works, what lands, what translates. Because at the end of the day, so much knowledge and science is there. Ultimately, it's about communicating it and translating it. So the sequence I just sort of walked you through was one of my attempts to make it easy, accessible, and practical and science backed. And I'm, just beginning, but that's how I got there.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I love that it's an art and a science, and you are picking up from the all those aspects. And also, I think it comes. There's a lot of value derived from your previous experience as a futurist and somebody involved in marketing and those kinds of things. Do you think that that was also a part that helped you make it more accessible, speaking to people? Not necessarily from an academic to an academic kind of framework, or scientists talking to scientists, or people who are mostly comfortable with complexity, but making things simple but not too simple, make them digestible but and usable, but not necessarily watering them down, but really helping them come alive.
Yeah, I think it did. And I used to run a branding agency called Tinderbox Creative. And this is a good 10 years ago now. And it was all about humanizing brands so that, humans could relate to a brand. And this is really how I got on um, well, down the rabbit hole of neuroscience. And I was looking at the neuroscience of connection and things like that. But just you saying that made me think, at the end of the day, really what I'm trying to do here, and just not me and my network of amazing, brilliant people, is humanize the science of human potential, make it relatable and practical, and make it work. Because in everyday life, which is just chaos for most people, especially if you have kids, which I do not, but I see enough of it to know it's chaos.
It is.
And so it is, yeah. And so I think it's like humanizing it. When I say democratize, I think it's not only just making accessible from a financial perspective, but making accessible from a lifestyle perspective and from a languaging perspective and a cultural perspective and all those different things. So yeah, I think you're right. The experience I had, it's really interesting how things come full circle. I never thought my career, as it was 10 years ago, would ever relate to what it is now, because they are quite different. But it's just now in 2023, especially sort of working on the future flourishing and doing my own thing, I see how all of these bits meld together in a really
Yeah,
interesting
yeah,
way.
I love it. I'm sure it does, and I'm sure it comes from the mastery, as you said, mastering the moment, and those are past moments that you had already, like mastered and broke from them, and so yeah, let's talk a bit about flow, because as you said, it's your favorite topic in the world. So tell us about how flow came to be in your life. What kind of practices do you have to increase the frequency, the quality, the amount, or whatever? How do you measure flow, or if it's unmeasurable, or how do you see it? How do you dive into it? And what can people learn from you about flow in this podcast?
Well, flow is a peak mental state where you feel your best and perform your best. So that's an actual scientific definition. And to put it more simply, I would just ask the audience to think about that moment where time and space and sense of self disappears, and you're just immersed in the moment, and things become effortless, and you feel really good, and whatever you're doing, you're performing at quite a good level. So it could be as simple as a microflow experience of gardening or cooking, or really writing a good email quickly that just came to you, or writing 500 words of your novel, and it just came to you as easy. um, Often microflow comes in everyday moments, in exercise, moving, good conversation, laughing, interacting with your kids in a positive way. Then there's a spectrum of flow. So the other side of the spectrum is quite transcendent experiences. And that could come from an everyday moment, looking at the full moon. I had one of those moments recently here in Brighton or looking at a sunset, or having a very deep conversation with someone that you care about. Or it can come from things like skiing a mountain, or jumping out of a plane, or something immensely physical and risk taking. But really, no matter what end of the spectrum you're at, you're in a space where you're got a sense of selflessness, timelessness, effortlessness, and there tends to be some sort of pattern recognition that drops in, or sort of intense ability to have an aha moment, even if it's a little micro one. Jumping out of a plane might give you a bigger sort of feeling of thoughts around life and the universe. So it's really interesting because it's a state that any human can access. I also always like to point out that dogs can access this state. We're sure about this. Probably other animals too, but humans can access it. It's your birthright, and some humans access it more naturally than others. So often, creatives or sports people um, will get into flow naturally in that work that they do. Uh, but it's a wildly healthy state to be in, because you feel your best and you perform your best. And there's reasons for that I can explain from a neurochemical and brainwave perspective. But just at sort of surface level, it's a space where it can up level well-being, and in turn, it can up level performance. So I see that as a massive win-win for probably anything you're doing in life, whether it's personal or professional. Um, and I came to it because, I mean, I read Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi when I was about 21, and I think it had just come out around that time, or maybe 10 years before or something. It hadn't been long out, and I don't know how or who handed me that book at that stage, but I was always aware of his work and aware of the psychology of flow, and very tuned into things like, that may seem a little woo woo, but serendipity and synchronicity and things like that. It wasn't until about 6 years ago that I became tuned into the science of flow, or the neuroscience specifically of flow. Um, when someone handed me Stephen Kotler's book, Rise of Superman. And the reason they did that is because I'd started a doctorate in business leadership, because I was interested in how to up-level well-being in the world. And I felt that um, leaders within organizations had a massive opportunity to be part of that up-leveling. And also I feel personally that they have a responsibility. But aside from my personal view, they had an opportunity to do that. And the opportunity provided them with two things: up leveling mental health within the organization, which would then up level productivity and innovation and creativity and, I guess, meaningful organizational progress. So when I read that book and I realized that flow, due to the neuroscience, was now trainable, because on a neurobiological level, we're all very similar, and therefore there's certain functions that we can train that makes us more predispositioned to flow than usual. And there's things like the flow cycle and flow triggers that I can go into a little bit of detail to, or we can just point to some stuff in the show notes that might be useful for people to, if they're interested. But there's certain things that you can build into your life. First, understanding the flow cycle and what that means and what that feels like and what you can do to move through it. And then also understanding what flow triggers are and how you can then build them into your life. That on a very fundamental basis is wildly life changing. Then the psychology of flow is deeply personal. So I mean, Stephen Kotler is notoriously has the saying that you can scale biology, but you cannot scale psychology. The psychology of flow, so where you get your flow, when and how frequently, and what in what activity, and anchored to what values or meaning or purpose, will be completely different for every single human being on this planet. But how we build flow into our lives, or the ability to build and create that high flow lifestyle, there are certain fundamentals there that are universal that we can train, which I think is very, very interesting and useful. So the reason why I got so deeply immersed in this topic was because I was concerned about mental health. And I think the biggest challenge that we face it as humans right now is our mental health. And I see it as a way of not so much dealing with clinical pathological mental health or mental conditions, but certainly from a mental health perspective onwards, a baseline sort of onwards, there's a huge opportunity here for this kind of training to really help people up level their well-being, which in turn will up level their experience of life in general. And I just feel that there's just so many ways we could inject that into everything we do, how we lead people, how we nurture the coaches and mentors in this world, how we parent, all those kind of things. There's just a plethora of opportunity. So I'm wildly excited about that, and it's just really interesting because it's just not a mainstream topic yet. And I still, when people ask me what I do, struggle to say I train people in flow because you get a kind of a blank look and so often the way I'll explain what I do is by asking them what they love to do and figuring out what their high flow activity is or where they find the most flow. And then I say, well, I train people how to feel that more often, that feeling that you get. I train people how to do that. So yes, I could go on and on, so I'll pause for a minute so you can
Yes, I really resonate with a lot of what you said because if you live in a world where flow is already a thing, it's a concept that you've been thinking about a lot and you know very intimately and you experiment with it and like you can calibrate it and make it and I mean you begin moving your life towards it and using it as an instrument towards achieving your goals,
yes,
then it's like that's the water you swim in, like David Foster Wallace said, it becomes the water, and then you meet people who've never heard of it, and it seems like it's absurd that people don't learn about this in school, that it's not a more wider known
yeah,
concept. And also something that really resonated with me from what you said is the connection between leadership and flow,
mm,
because it does seem to me like sometimes one of the problems with talking about flow is that it's talked about as a very individual
mm-hmm.
experience, and the higher levels are those experienced as a group,
Yes,
as a team, or even as an
yeah,
organization, and leaders are responsible for teams and groups, organizations, and even their impact on society writ large.
yes.
So if you could we could explore that aspect of it, of the more collective intelligence, or the more collective aspect of flowing and flourishing in general.
Yeah, I love that you said flourishing too, because I think there's group flow and then group collective flourishing. Both are like the group or the collective nature of each of these concepts is where the magic lies. I joke about this idea that I mean I think it's a fact through the research that humans reported that group flow was better than sex. It's the most sought after human state. And I guess a good way to imagine what group flow might feel like if it feels unfamiliar is even something as simple as being at a football match in a huge crowd and having that excitement around you as you watch the same thing. You're getting a collective sense of flow by watching people in flow. Um, Other ways, music concerts are similar, or even just watching a film in a movie cinema. But then it can happen, obviously, in team sports. It can happen. A lot of the group flow research came from jazz ensembles. So, jazz musicians are one of the most flowiest, groups of people that can come together. And then, of course, it can happen in teams, in organizations. So, team flow is quite it's a term that's becoming more familiar within organizations, and it's where you will get your most incredible problem solving, creative innovation, and also a sense of connection, camaraderie, and a desire to collaborate, a desire to co create, and a sense of great fulfillment when everyone goes home at night. And so, just like there's individual flow cycle and individual flow triggers, there are researched individual, group or team flow cycles and triggers. And much of my work has been around how to help leaders understand not only, firstly, how to feel and be and live that way themselves, but then often when they've felt that and lived that and experienced that, they will be prepared to build into or embed into their culture, even if it's at a team level, let alone organizational, their leadership culture, uh, the right conditions for flow on an individual level, which is important, and then on a team or collective level. And this, I think, solves so many problems. I mean, if you have an organizational culture that has flow, individual and group flow embedded within it, then you're going to have an organizational culture that has people that are feeling their best and performing their best together toward a common goal. And the common goal, hopefully, is that organizational purpose. So there is complexity in that, and how to get to a place where that's possible. You require a leadership that is focused on values and purpose, and does exist for something that people want to live for. Because we're in 2023, and that's sort of how especially after the pandemic, unless you have those ingredients, you're not going to have people desiring to do that. But if you've got those things right, and a lot of organisations are toward that journey, or on that journey, then you can actively engage your people in a way that means they're on fire, and lit up and feeling fully alive, and they're anchored, and they're in synchrony toward a common goal of the organization, and that's how you're going to get meaningful organizational progress. So I think group flow is very important outside of work, outside of organizations. I think it's really important in families. I think it's really important in relationships. But I think it has huge potential for organizations moving forward at this moment in time. And the other thing I'll add to that, ultimately, the triggers for flow, whether it's group flow or individual flow, are almost, you could almost replace them with the term VUCA. So VUCA being volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous conditions, aka the external world that organizations are dealing with. Well, the actual triggers for flow are things like novelty, unpredictability, risk taking, complexity. It's just semantics. It's the same thing. So to get into this state of flow, you require this kind of uncertain, ever changing conditions. There's also other ingredients that are required, like a sense of psychological safety and a sense of a shared meaningful goal. There's internal conditions that an organization can create that mean when those external conditions hit, you're ready. You're ready to innovate. You're ready to create. You're ready to get the work done. And again, that's why I see it as a no-brainer for organizations. And it's all you're harnessing is human technology, humanness, brains and bodies. You don't need any other fancy technology. You don't need any other fancy leadership training. It's very simple. So I think it could really change things quickly.
Yeah, wow. I just realized that I had my own leap of insight with what you just said because VUCA has been sold to us as a problem,
Yes,
as something that needs to be avoided,
exactly.
that's something that is breaking us down, and it was accelerated by the pandemic and what is going to happen next and whatever. And it seems to me that from what you said, we already have the technology and the programming in our biology
Yes,
to deal with it, which is through flow.
yes,
And it's even how to come up fully alive and be lit up and on fire about it, and not just, I mean, like, see, transforming that issue into an opportunity, and looking at it from a different perspective with new lenses and fresh eyes. And so it makes me think about your view about the futures and the future of flourishing. And so I want to bring the topic of futuring because it's fascinating about how to I mean, you're a fantastic learner. You're a person who loves learning and loves bringing stuff forward to the world. And this topic of the future is really intriguing for me. So I really want to learn more how
Yes.
how that can be explored and what it's all about.
Well, I've always been, well, I'm not sure if I love the term futurist, but I've always been someone very inspired by the future and optimistic. You know, I'm an optimistic soul. At the same time, I'm very pragmatic and very sensitive, therefore tuned into the problems of the world right now. And that's a tension that's sometimes hard to hold. And it's hard to sometimes find, I guess, a perspective or a lens through which to look at the world where both of those insights are useful. And I mean, I've been inspired by Bucky Fulmeister Minster and things like that. Like, there's been people of the past that have really helped my framing of the future. But it was the work of Ari Wallach recently. I mean, maybe 2 years ago, where I started to really dive into his work, and he calls himself a futures thinking with an S on the end, and it's he's kind of conceived this more radical way of looking at life through making decisions for the long term or through a long term lens, as opposed to this kind of short termism that we are all quite stuck in. I mean, the brain hasn't really been designed to look forward much beyond 2 or 3 years. We even find it hard to stick to regimes that are going to help us in 10 years' time. So it's a biological thing, but he has done some really interesting work around this idea of long term thinking, a long term mindset, and long term mantras that he helps to help people train their brains to think in that way. And, you know, another really two good people that are brilliant to read around this again is Stephen Kotler and the work that he's done with Peter Diamandis. And the book "The Future Was Faster Than You Think" that came out literally, I think, the 11th of March 2020, when the world pandemic was declared, which is ironic in itself. But that's a great another. This thinking is not dissimilar to theirs. And really, it means it's looking for a way of looking into the far future, but being able to act on that today in some meaningful way, and which is very hard. But there's three key ideas that he has. One is this idea that there is multiple possible futures. So we don't just have one future ahead of us, and it would be wrong to think that we do. A lot of people try and frame it in that way, but there's so many different mega trends out there, whether it's demographic or environmental or social cultural, science and tech developments, economic shifts. There's so many multiple futures out there. So this is where an adaptability of organizations needs to be important. You can't just be headed toward that one future, because anything could change tomorrow, and you need to be able to, I mean, you need to be able to adapt to those VUCA conditions, and be curious enough to adapt, and be humble enough to adapt, to not just think, oh, that's the one future and that's where we're going. So firstly, it's just understanding or being able to embrace this notion of multiple possible futures. He then moves into thinking and talking about this notion of transgenerational thinking. So this is the idea that in your lifetime today, in your personal individual lifetime, you're able to think about what may have happened in the past, in your personal generational line, but also writ large. And then you're able to think about what might happen in the future, not only with your personal family and generations, but um, generations far, far ahead of you, you know, 7, 8 generations into the future, and having a sense of curiosity and empathy around that. So that's the second part. And then the third part is, he calls it telos, which is obviously a Greek term, but it's the ability to align your actions of today, right here, right now, with that broader purpose, that broader vision for the future. And I think that's the hardest thing, to be able to, in your day to day, moment to moment, mastering those moments, to be acting in a way that is in alignment with your desire for the far, far future. So I think that's really, really incredibly difficult. But I think that's also what I'm defining as flourishing right here, right now, is the ability to do that. So there, here's the kind of three key ideas around this idea of the future, and that's what I really have been inspired by, and was what has resonated with me, and that's what I'm trying to build in a lot to the programs that I'm building. Toward the end of the program, it's around, well, let's think about the futures, um, and I'm really reframing this notion of legacy. So legacy today is so much about what you leave behind to your children, or what you leave behind in the way that people remember you, like right here, right now. What if your legacy landed and only was realized in 7 generations' time? Like reframing this notion of legacy, and then, directing a lot of wealth that's being sat on right now by the baby boomers and the billionaires. Um, what if it was directed into making an impact where someone remembered you for a very meaningful reason in thousands of years' time, or hundreds of years' time? So that's where the futures, becomes exciting and meaningful to me. I think if I could rename my company The Future of Flourishing, I would call it The Futures of Flourishing, but it's a bit harder to say and people probably wouldn't get it. But I certainly bring that out in the messaging, and that's where it comes from for me. That's why it's meaningful to me.
Yeah, what that makes me, what comes to mind right now is that we are the benefactors of those that came before us and many generations ago and everything. So we, as you have told me before, that we have the responsibility of being a good ancestor,
Yes,
even if it's not our children or our descendants, but the generations to come. And that is a fantastic frame to put our life purpose and the way we flourish. I mean, because you could say that mastering the moment sounds like a very short term
mm,
assignment,
yes,
but in reality, the future or many futures, which is many opportunities and everything, live in that present moment, and you realize them in that present moment. So, uh, it's highly complex, as you say. It's not easy to integrate, but once you do it, it sets a lot of things free and alive.
yes.
And yeah, so yeah, so what is your vision for the future of flourishing in particular? Yeah.
Well, it's been a journey, and one where I've been experimenting with what um, what's needed right now in this sort of realm of human flourishing. There's a lot of really good work being done. So I've been experimenting and trying to figure out where I could be of most use. And we've landed on a an idea where, I mean, where I see a need right now is a lot of the people doing the work who are, dedicated to human flourishing. So coaches, facilitators, educators, therapists, artists, academics, researchers, they're doing their lives are dedicated to human flourishing, mostly with a desire also for global flourishing, and they don't necessarily always have the right conditions for their own personal flourishing. Often those jobs are not well funded, or the conditions for them to really flourish as an enterprise are not there, or they've not been taught that, or they have such pressure to continue learning and upgrading their skills as a coach. It's other things suffer. So I want to provide a space and place, a platform where those brilliant people can come together and get peer support, connection and community, continuous learning without having to pay a fortune, and really importantly, the space and place to integrate the immense amount of learning that they're doing elsewhere. And that will be a mixture of online virtual events with amazing subject matter experts speaking. It'll be group flow integration facilitated sessions where we're using the technology of group flow to actually integrate learning from whether it's books or trainings. It'll be peer-to-peer coaching and support. There'll be an annual gathering where we can come together in real life, and then also local hubs around the world offline where people can gather in real life, which is something I miss very much. I do most of my work here online, and I miss human contact. Um, so that's sort of the first stage, and there'll be a fellowship that we align with that. where people can come in and do sort of a 3-month intensive training around how to flourish as an entrepreneurial impact maker. So just learning the basics, but not in a way that's focused on them, and also integrates the ability to have a flourishing enterprise. So integrates some learnings around business and how to create a flourishing business, or how to be a flourishing entrepreneur when you're dedicated to human flourishing. And then the second phase for me, which I'm excited by, is creating a venture studio that really looks at two things. One, nurturing and nourishing and boosting the projects and research of the artists and scientists and academics doing the work that needs to be done. And then on the other hand, having an incubator or a startup incubator where we have a particular thesis around things like holistic health, the loneliness epidemic, um, parenting, and then how to nurture creativity, and bringing together an interdisciplinary team of people to help bring that to life, from ideation to launch, and then making sure we've got the artists and academics and scientists feeding into that. So you've got sort of the practitioners, the entrepreneurs, the artists, the scientists all coming together to solve some really big problems. So that's the other phase. So that's what I'm about to launch in the next couple of weeks, and very excited to do so.
Yeah, wow, it sounds fantastic, and I guess what has been the most fun in that project, because it seems there are so many components. There's design, there's bringing people together. What have you really loved about it? That's got you really excited about launching?
Well, my most favorite thing in the world is to, well, I love seeing people's potential. I think every person, I joke about this, it is a joke, but I fall in love with every human I meet, because I can just see this immense potential within every human. And so I love the opportunity to provide the conditions for that to come to life. So I'm at my best when I'm bringing together people who I see as brilliant, and allowing them to, flourish in their friendships and relationships and professional relationships, and kind of helping seed that, and then helping provide the conditions for that, and then helping get that out to the world. So I just see this as an opportunity to bring together all of my favorite humans, and then all of their favorite humans, and just have a lot of fun doing that, rather than, we've all done great work and we've all struggled in our own way, and I think it's time now. And it's always going to be a struggle, but it doesn't have to be that much. There's conditions we can put in there so that it is a little bit more fun on a day-to-day basis together, and therefore we're making more impact. So yeah, the most fun I have is just watching the people I love fall in love with each other and create amazing things. So that's what I'm trying to provide a platform for.
Yes, yes, I love that, people falling in love with each other, and even with themselves.
Yes, exactly.
That's something that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And because I mean, people who are listening to this, we can give you links and ways to participate and to get involved.
Yeah.
But I wanted people to realize that this is something that's been really heartfelt, that this comes from a real purpose in life, and that it can be shared, and from a great community of people, of great practitioners, great thinkers, people who are striving to be the best in the world in what they do, but they're also very open to hearing voices come from other parts of the world, other ways of thinking. What I have experienced is very, it's incredible, because they are willing to be moved, to change their minds, and to move their lives forward from what everybody is doing. So it's a very opening and very inviting kind of atmosphere and community.
Yes.
Yes. And also, so what would you say, I mean, for somebody who's listening, who says, okay, that sounds fantastic, that's something that I want to bring in my life, what would you say to them about the next steps?
In terms of flourishing or flow, or
Or getting involved with your project,
projects. Well,
or whatever.
we have a website, futureofflourishing.com. So you can jump on there. It's live now, and it's about to be officially launched to the world in the next week. And in November, we'll have a fun launch event with lots of special guests and music and art. So jump on there, and you can sign up to different experiences. And also, there's a one-on-one, there's an option to connect with me one-on-one through that website. I would love, and I'm also always open to catching up with people and just getting a sense of who they are, what they're trying to find and become and be. And I'm always willing just to meet with people and connect and see how I can help. So that's another way.
Oh wow. Yeah, no, I'm thinking about what you asked me right now. I mean, what would you say to somebody right now? It's kind of like an assignment or a homework or an activity that you would a little seed that you want to leave with them and to say, look, do this.
Yes.
What would you tell somebody to do to get started in this path?
All right. So number one, just close your eyes and think about what activity it is that you love doing the most, where you get that feeling of time disappearing, that inner critic in your head shuts up, you're enjoying the moment, uh, it's effortless, but you've got a level of skill to achieve whatever it is you're doing, whatever that is. And think of the thing that's, I mean, you might get that in gardening and doing the dishes and cooking, where, that's beautiful. But just think of that thing that's a little bit more extreme, which might be swimming in the ocean or actually going for a 5K run or playing a game of golf or painting or, it's a yoga, hot yoga class or, something, whatever that is that's accessible to you on a fairly regular basis, schedule it literally in your calendar as much as you can. Because ultimately, the more flow you get, the more flow you get. And that means on a neural level, when you're carving out those neural pathways in your brain for flow, it's going to, the more you do it, the easier those pathways are going to be found. So if you're doing it in an activity that's easy to you, it might be reading, it might be writing, whatever that is, literally do it as much as you can. And then you'll find flow easier in other aspects of your life where you don't find it easier. And that might be at work, or it might be in certain relationships that you have, it might be responsibilities that you have, whatever. You're going to find that level of focus more easily if you're prioritizing that primary flow activity that you really enjoy. And we're not really told to do that in life. That would almost feel like a guilt around doing that. And when I coach people, train people, the first thing I say is identify what that thing is and do it as much as you can. It's only going to benefit you and everyone around you and everything that you do. So that's my number one tip.
Fantastic, fantastic. And I would add to that, now think how your life is after you've been doing it, as Claire says. If you're a good student of Claire, how your life will improve. And think about it and get inspired and go get after it. Yeah, a little coaching mini session right there.
Awesome.
All right.
All right.
Awesome. All right, I think this has been fantastic. It's just a tip of the iceberg because this program is very deep and very well thought out, and it's coming alive with what Claire was saying. I mean, it's being launched in just a few days from now. So keep stay tuned for what is coming. And thank you, Claire. Thank you so much for being here with us. And I wish you all the very best as always.
Thank you so much. And likewise, and thank you for having me. That was a wonderful conversation, as always.
I loved it. Yeah, thanks. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you.